records, all the documents. We opened up an additional pits. Excuse me, I forgot to mention Tracy Blaze is here, the town administrator from Newbury. Tracy was brought into, right about that time, Tracy was brought into the situation to inform her and the selectmen about what was going on. We had done several executive sessions with the city council just to let them know that we're concerned, we don't know what we're dealing with yet, but we were certainly told by the Inspector General that we had to keep everything relatively under wraps at this time. They completed their investigation, issued us a report, which again is under confidentiality. It's something that is not being released to the public because of pending litigation, and they said you have enough information to go to the Office of the Attorney General. We then met with a team from the Attorney General's office, and they began their own investigation. At the same time, we began meeting with CDM Smith as the engineer of record to present to them our preliminary findings and to have conversations with them about what we're finding. Obviously, our first meeting with them was fairly difficult. They started pushing back on corrosion, and then when we showed them what we had pulled out of the system, the whole conversation changed. We have had 5 meetings with CDM Smith, and the last meeting we had in February, I told you that our next step was to actually have materials tested as well as to do some boring so that we could have groundwater as well as soils tested to find out what we were dealing with. Hi, Lenny Mira, your state rep, for those of you in Newbury. Nice to have you here. So it took us from that point in February going forward, actually, wait a minute, let me back up. Then October 29th of last year is when we had another water main break during Hurricane Sandy at 4:30 in the morning. And for me, that was, again, it's just letting us know that there are significant issues with the system that we have to address. We met with CDM again in December, told them about the second water main break, and then we had to move forward to determine what we were dealing with. So at that point, we began working with them around protocol. What is the protocol that we were going to use to maintain chain of custody for the materials that they pulled out of the water main breaks, and how were they going to obtain groundwater and soil samples with our observations and make sure that they, what was taken out in terms of chain of custody gets to a lab in Newark, Delaware, which was a lab that they chose. We also hired at that point in January the team of Rubin and Rudman to represent the city as well as all of Plum Island's interests. And we also hired a lab, Mass Metallurgic Research, to work with us, as well as an on-site engineer. And we now have 2 engineers who are consulting to the project who have experience in this situation. So from our last meeting in February, when I gave you all this information up to where we are, I said the next meeting we would have is when we had more information about corrosion. So we worked for several months around protocol for, as I said, what was going to be tested, how it was going to be tested, as well as the groundwater and the soil samples. Those were all sent in June to this lab in Newark, Delaware, and we received information regarding those results in late April. That information was then sent to our lab, but we also had witnesses, John Eric White and our lab, who went to Newark, Delaware to observe the testing of the materials. We felt that that was really important in terms of the integrity of our case. So the results from the corrosion testing and the soil samples and water samples came back. Again, CDM Smith paid for all of this, as they should, and our engineers, our lab, all reviewed the results. We met with our legal team at that point, determining next steps, and at this point, the AG's investigation is also moving forward, hence they gave us permission to be able to talk a little bit more freely about what we are working on. And we are now at the point where we met with CDM Smith 2 weeks ago to talk about their response to the report. They are acknowledging that there is significant corrosion, there is metal in that was inappropriately used in the system that needs to be replaced. So they have come together and presented us with a fix or change out of the metals that they are going to do for the 2 water main breaks that have occurred, as well as changing out some of the metal that they can that's beside it in the sewer system. Now, this is just a small, little, tiny fix that they want to do. This does not mean that this is going to be the process going forward. But because they know that there is no cathodic protection, the ductile iron pipes were not coated with polyethylene, which they should have been, the sleeves. So this is why they're coming in to address these minor, these fixes on the 2 water main sites. In addition, they want to take 50 additional boring samples. They came out last week and marked places where they want to take additional samples, because that will give us more information about the soil and groundwater conditions and if we are finding, which we anticipate to do, the same level of materials that were, and organics that were in the soil next to the directional drill and the other water main break, then of course we're going to be as concerned about where we are with the integrity of the materials put into the system at that point. So to date, so they'll be coming out doing those boring tests. We're still working with them around, and our legal team and our lab and engineering staff regarding the protocol for, again, the geotech borings that they're going to take, the 50 of them, and DigSafe will be out probably next week or the week after to mark that, and then we're going to look at the drawings and determine whether or not we're going to let them take samples from wherever they've identified, because obviously we're concerned about, you know, the pipes that are in the ground and making sure that they don't hit any of these things. We are monitoring the system 24/7, as we always have. You don't need to be concerned that there all of a sudden is going to be some massive catastrophic collapse of the entire system, but we have to deal with the raw materials that were put in the system. They did not use the level of stainless that they should. They did not use, as I said, there is about 4,000 square feet of ductile iron in the water system, and so those need to be protected. And so these are the kinds of issues that we're working with CDM Smith now in terms of what they're willing to do. We also have had one kid hit a fire hydrant who was texting on her phone, and we also noticed that there's some problems with the materials similarly that were used to connect the fire hydrants to the system. So that's where we are sort of in a nutshell right now in terms of the process. We are continuing to move forward with our legal strategy, as well as supporting all the efforts of the Attorney General's office and working on their strategy going forward. So there's 2 tiers, 2 tracks of litigation that are potentially going forward if we can't get an adequate settlement, which is what we're hoping with CDM Smith. We've also met with SB and DNC Construction, who also had a phase 1 of the turnpike water sewer, and then phase 2 was the other contractor for the mainland system. So I'm open to take questions at this point from you, but this is overall where we are and what I can share with you. Yes.
Paul Davids, Plum Island. We, as you know, are paying a lot for what we were put into. There's a lot of resources going, and I'm sure they're all very professional and are doing a great job. But somebody needs to pay for that. I hope that we aren't going to be added with that expense. We Plum Islanders aren't going to be added with that expense. Can you answer that?
Absolutely, no, not at all. We have put in our legal budget what we hope will be sufficient funds to get us through, you know, the legal costs this year. But our goal is to recoup every single dime that we have put in terms of overtime, materials, efforts, Every single piece of that we anticipate to be reimbursed.
Thank you.
You're welcome. This will not be on the backs of Plum Island, or the rest of the city for that matter. Yes, Ron?
Now, DNC, are they still in business?
Yes.
Yeah, I just saw them working up in Maine.
Yeah, no, they had come in for, we had one meeting with them with CDM Smith and SV Construction, and I had some trouble finding them because I had thought that they had gone out of business too, but they're still
Well,
around.
that's what I had heard, and I
Yeah.
saw them working up in
Yeah.
Maine.
Yeah, no, they're still around. Yes.
Hi, I'm Leon Friedman, Reservation Terrace, Newburyport. May I ask a few questions?
Of course, Leon.
Was there a bill of materials? Was there specifications that someone gave the city and said, this is what we're going to use?
There were specs, yes, that were made. The problem is that they didn't consider all of the preliminary assessment and testing that was done out here prior to the system being put in, which clearly indicated that you have to take into consideration the saline environment and the organics that are out here. They used the cheapest level of bolts they, known to man, and we found out that they were made in India.
Well, not to put the cart in front of the horse in front of the cart, and I don't expect an answer now, but why wasn't this picked up at the very beginning? It's not a question of, you're telling me not a question of having the bill of materials and the specifications. If your specification says a 2x6 and you put in a 2x4, that's negligence.
They
And is
tell
that a
me,
similar situation here?
well,
Where they said X and you got X minus?
well, there's several layers of that because there were so many different materials that were used in the system. Those of you remember, one of the first things that was discovered was a problem with the Weaver gaskets that was picked up way back when, and then there was this whole to-do about that again. I was a city councilor at the time, and as city councilors, we got periodic updates, but we weren't involved in the direct oversight of this. This was that Plum Island Working Group that met regularly and monthly and were supposedly monitoring the system. I don't know where the failures happened. I don't know if it was our OPM. I don't know if it was, who was supposed to be watching this, or if in fact, when you talk to the other contractors, it said this. We went into Prescott in Middleton, picked it off the shelf. It was stamped. It said what it was supposed to be, what it said on the specs, and we put it in the ground. So whether it is the fact that the specs were not specific enough and should have taken into account the saline environment, those are all the kinds of questions that our legal team will be investigating, as well as the AG's office.
Okay. Are you permitted to tell us the scope of what is anticipated in dollars and cents that this project is going to require?
Don't know
Is it
that.
10,000, 50, 100,000, 5 million?
Leon, if I knew that, I would tell you. We don't
You
have
cannot.
that. We just don't know yet, because at this point, it's all speculation, because we don't know yet in terms of the soil conditions, the groundwater conditions regarding the rest of the system. But we've only talked about water. We had major problems in, Jamie, when was it? 9? Okay, 8, 9, where we had the airbag system was freezing. And, we had a lot of problems with that
Just
system.
fell.
Is everything all right? Oh, he's making a grand entrance. Nice to see you, Joe. Thank you. So the water system, the sewer system also has had problems in that it's frozen. And so we had to bring back air back, we retimed the system, and we've also figured out how to insulate the cans. But there is a problem in that the specifications for the airbag system called for the cans that, you know, hold your individual pumps to be under soils. They're not. They put them anywhere they wanted. But we've been able to figure that piece out in terms of insulating underneath the cans, thank you, Jamie. And we haven't had problems going forward with the system freezing. The other piece that's a problem with the airbag system is that it should have been alarmed, but because cost overruns, delays in the start, I'm not sure for the reasons because I wasn't here at the time, but they took out the alarm system for the airbag system, which means that in the event that there's an alarm that goes off, that there is a problem somewhere in the system, you know, these guys are running around putting their ears into candy canes. So, I mean, that's a problem that should have been fixed.
Do your engineers suspect that whatever problems you know of now are in the entire system, meaning the main line going down Northern Boulevard, as well as the appendage lines or the branch lines as well?
That's an
So
excellent
there's a-
question. We don't know that
You
yet
don't know.
because we haven't done the additional borings on the rest of the
So
island.
this is really a big problem.
Yes, yes.
And
This
you
is-
cannot tell us right now the approximate cost or the anticipated cost, whether it's going to be hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars. You can't answer that.
Don't know that yet. But I'm telling you as much as I can tell you now is what we know.
But it's a big problem.
Yes,
Okay, I know I'm taking time, but I live on Plum Island and it's important to
of
me.
course.
I can't talk for the Newburyport side. The Newburyport side has a water collecting problem. When it rains, there's water that accumulates on Northern Boulevard and you cannot walk. You cannot walk on the sidewalk and have a car pass by at the same time. Water all over. And I'm suggesting that when push comes to shove and decisions are made about this system, that be taken into consideration. You've got to do something about getting rid of that water that's collecting after a rain. It just has to be done.
Okay.
One more question and I'll finish. Going back years ago, I was very timid and I didn't get involved in the project until the very end. But I do know that Barry Connell made very, very specific comments and commitments about this system. My next statement, I'm not sure of. It's my understanding that when the roads were open, someone made a suggestion to bring natural gas onto Plum Island. I remember it distinctly. It's my understanding that the city went to National Grid, I think, who would have been the supplier. I'm not sure of the name. I think it's National Grid. And National Grid said, we'll put in gas. We'll put the lines in, and we'll put the lines in free of charge. I got that directly from National Grid. The city said,
We're talking about water and sewer.
Yeah,
This
I
is
agree. Can we
interesting,
stick to
but
that?
We have serious water and sewer questions. I think the gas question is a great one, but it's not the forum for it right now. We're talking about a water and sewer system that's in jeopardy. And I would just suggest we should stay on message tonight.
yeah,
We all
but
have
if,
questions, sir.
I understand, I
Sir,
agree
you
with
have
you,
the
but if
floor
we're going to
for quite a
open
while.
the road and there's going to be an opportunity.
No, it's a point well taken, and
Okay, I agree. Just let me look at my notes. I think I'm finished.
Okay,
I'm
in the back, yes?
In reference to what you brought up
Are our hydrants compromised?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Are the hydrants compromised? They are functional, but we are concerned about their longevity in terms of because of the bolts that were, the materials that were used. And we put on the table with CDM Smith that we want them. We fixed 4 out of 147. 187. So they have all the backup numbers for me. So that we would like them to also come in when they're doing the water and sewer main fix to also check on all the hydrants also at that time.
Is
But
that a guarantee that they will do that?
well, this is a part of our negotiations with them. And you know, we need to get this done. This needs to be assessed. But at this point, we're, again, monitoring the system very, very carefully. And part of the reason why there wasn't flushing that happened in the hydrants that normally happens this time, because we're just concerned about you know, the stability of the hydrants. And if we start flushing, that could be a problem. So that's why that's not happening at this point. But we will continue to monitor and continue to push for them to check on all 182 hydrants.
Fire is,
Of course, yes. But you already had a chance, so you have to wait. Yes, David?
Donna, I recognize that the Plum Island project didn't start and you weren't involved in your watch as mayor and on the council. But during the project, right from the start and before it, there were many, many executive and non-public meetings that went on. And as far as I know, none of the information, those minutes have never been released. That may be a source of information for you if you're not familiar with them or you can find them.
The minutes of the Plum Island Working Group?
Plum Island
We have them all,
Okay, well,
except for the
it was
former...
clear to me that after some of those meetings, decisions were made, like the city agreed that the pipes that were put in Northern Boulevard that were wrong could stay. Now, these were sewer pipes, but
Because
they didn't meet the specification.
this was the Weaver gasket issue?
This was from the Plum Island Work Group. This was the city decided that after some of these meetings. Secondly, they decided that the blow-offs at the end of the dead-end streets that allow for water flushing could be eliminated. So people on dead-end streets don't have good water because they're not flushed a lot of times. Thirdly, they allowed some of the hydrants to be eliminated. Okay, and those were decisions that were made by the city. Also, they agreed to raise the price of Plum Island project when the borings weren't done right by this oversight contractor. Okay, to start with, so they had to add money because the borings weren't done correctly to begin with when they did those borings. That's known fact. Everybody knew that, or should have known that. Who was the contractor? The contractor, the oversight contractor and design contractor for this thing was given a no-bid contract. After he delivered a study contract 7 months late, and there wasn't time, they said, to go out the bid on it. This study contract he did, he got as a high bidder, 80% higher than the other qualified bidders. And that was the city's decision. I wrote about this. This was long before my time on the council, too. I wrote about this to everybody.
The IG is
I'd
investigating.
be glad to give you that information,
I would appreciate that, David.
okay?
And I know the IG was involved in that bid.
And obviously, that influenced what the DEP did on this project, okay? And Plum Islanders, as you can recognize, are very sensitive to the fact that they're not clued into what's going on. We lost our vote on this project because of a secret meeting that went on at the last minute, okay? We could have voted on that project ourselves. Now, the current executive, I looked at the AG's regulations on executive sessions. There's nothing that says the AG can put a gag order to have a city council go into executive sessions. They give very, very specific reasons why you can have an executive sessions. And then they give you procedures that you have to follow to do that. The executive session minutes that I saw in the open session said nothing about they do allow ongoing strategy sessions for ongoing litigations, but not potential litigations, except for two specific reasons that they quote. One is just threatening litigations, in other words, somebody's ready to sue the city, or there's very demonstrable evidence that it's clearly likely that litigation is going to take place.
And that's what we went under.
Okay? But nothing was said when you go into these things that it's potential litigations or that there's any demonstrated evidence that you're going to sue somebody. Nothing said about that. There's nothing said when you go into executive session. You're going to do strategy sessions. Read them. I read them. There's no reason to go into executive sessions for the reason you give it. Now that's why we're sensitive. I don't care if you go into executive sessions, but I mean that was months ago. We need information out here to know what's going on. We've been denied information from the beginning of this project.
Well, that's not entirely true.
Okay?
It wasn't-
Now, obviously, it's not right to give a sole source contract, and it's not right to give, and you know who did it. Okay?
And what was one of the first things I did when I became mayor?
Yes, but the city let them do it. And obviously, the DEP, the state is involved in this just as much as the contractor is and the city is. So, I think you should be aware of that. And we have to know about that. We do know about some of it, obviously, because we live out here and we followed the project that was going on. And so, when are we going to see what's going on out here?
Well, I'm telling you what we know. I mean, this is what we know now.
Taking a long time.
Well, it takes a long time to negotiate protocol, to get it reviewed through legal, to get it reviewed through, I mean, I told you what I could tell you up through February, and then I said I would meet again once we had information regarding the corrosion, and that just was resolved recently. And that's why we're here. At this point, with the release of the gag order on me, which was one of the biggest issues, we can begin to update you more regularly in terms of what's
It's
going
funny,
on.
I don't see anything in the Attorney General's regulations that he could put a gag on it.
I had to sign a statement under penalties of perjury.
Did the council?
No, but how can I talk to the council if I'm under a gag order?
Why should you have to sign a gag order by the Attorney General's office?
But we're moving beyond that now, okay? So I'm sorry that that's what has happened, but now we're moving forward.
Fourth Street, Plum Island. Everybody in the room is talking about costs, water problems, sewer problems, hydrant problems. There's one issue that you should all understand. Camp Dresser McKee Smith, as well as any legal firm, real estate firm, they have an insurance policy called E&O, errors and omissions. And they all have it. And it's one of the categories that they can draw down on to pay for all of these legal fees, all of these repairs to the system. It's not going to be on the taxpayers. And if it even begins to go to the taxpayers, the mayor and the AG's office just goes through another route so it doesn't come out of our eyes. It's very important to understand that that process has been in place for years. And it should give you a little comfort, but now we can worry about what the heck's going wrong.
John, do you have anything else to add to that?
What the gentleman just said is definitely correct. And, being representing the city in this matter, we're very sensitive to your frustration, to your time concerns, and the fact that you have to live under these conditions. We understand. But I think you have to understand that this is a very complicated and complex case. Construction, litigation, and construction cases in general are painstakingly complicated. It's all about documents, it's all about scientific evidence. We're lawyers, we're not engineers. We have to rely on the city engineers, we have to hire our own experts, because we have to make sure that protocol and our science is spot on. Because if it isn't, then ultimately we have to go to a court of law. The case won't hold up, and the last thing we want is to lose a case on a technicality, because our science wasn't correct, because our protocol wasn't correct, because we rushed. So we're kind of trying to be as meticulous as we can at this point, so we don't make a mistake, so we don't prejudice your legal rights, so that if we cannot resolve this with CDM peaceably, with the Attorney General quickly, and we do have to go to litigation, you know, we'll have our ducks in a row. We won't lose the case on a technicality or something that we didn't do right in our science. And that's what we're doing right now. It's unbelievably complicated and painstaking to go through these documents, and that's been a little bit of a delay. We're now at a point where we can hopefully sit down, make a reasonable demand. Not quite there yet, our engineers aren't quite there yet, but we're working to that where we can make an intelligent demand on their behalf to get every single penny back. That's our goal. We don't want to, but we also don't want to agree to a methodology or a settlement that isn't going to fix the problem either, and you're back here 2 years from now. That's the last thing we want. So I think, again, you just got to understand from a legal perspective, it's very, very complicated. And as the gentleman points out, if it does go to litigation, we're going to get into insurance coverage, and the CDM loses some control of the case, and the insurance company's attorneys take over. And then you have more rounds of discovery, paperwork, science, and it strings out for a long time. We don't want to see that happen because we want to try to resolve this as quickly as possible, but we're hired to protect our interests, and we have to make sure things are done right, and that's what we're trying to do on your behalf.
Thank you, Jim.
Most people here understand that it's a very complicated issue and everything.
Can you speak up just a little bit?
I think most people understand that it's a very complicated issue, the legal part of it, but I think a lot of the frustration is like what this gentleman said, from the very beginning, the project smelled of a rat and it never went out to be bid. And then many things happened over the years that was going on, like that gasket thing. And then there was the big study, because they said, they were putting in a different gasket than they agreed to. It was supposed to be a lesser quality. And there was the big study, and the work was hard.
They
And all of that.
Smith
And
made
then,
sure.
and then they came to the decision that it's okay to leave those instead of saying, you dig them all up and put in what you said.
Right. CDM Smith made a point when we first started meeting of bringing that point up, saying that they spent $80,000 on that study. I could care less.
But in the meantime, though, someone from the city must have been in charge of watching that they were doing the job the way they were supposed to be. I'm curious.
My understanding was that there was a working group and an owner's project manager who was supposed to be overseeing this. I don't know where all the things fell at that time. I can only pick up from this first water main break and what I've been doing to address this issue since April of 2011. And that's, other than, there were, as I said, periodic updates to the city council, very, very global, never got into the, down into the level of detail because city councils just aren't involved in that level of construction. So I can't go back and tell you about what happened back then. I can only tell you what I've been trying to do since this first happened, the first water main break in 2011. So, but I think your point's well taken, that there were signs along the way that were missed. Yes, sir.
I'm Steve Grant, I'm on Plum Island. And this is related to the gasket issue. It did bother me along the way that CDM was ostensibly doing oversight of the project, hired their own lab to give them a report that said there was no problem. That didn't sound right because the lab was working for the oversight contractor that should have noted the problem to begin with as the pipes were going in. But where I'm going with this, as well as that, the people of Plum Island paid for the oversight contractor to observe the work being done. And perhaps it'll come out in discovery, and maybe it needs to come out in discovery, but whoever was being paid to do the oversight of the actual digging of the trench and putting the pipes together should have been looking and seeing, aha, one O-ring is only going in, not two. And presumably they submitted reports along the way saying that things were done according to the specs. And if they submitted that, in fact, there's only a single O-ring pipe going in, well, that's a problem of falsification of the reports that were done, and we paid for that oversight, and it wasn't done correctly. And that may be part of the legal issue which you will want to explore.
It is.
Again,
Absolutely
that's
is.
where we're at.
Absolutely is. Bob?
Mayor, I have just a couple of quick questions, and hopefully your team can answer them. One, Bob Carter's over at Plum Island. One, the warranty on the project. I'm assuming, we're all assuming, has expired, the warranty period on the project. Do we know what that length of time was? Was that of any?
I can speak as far as the sewer goes. Our warranty with the station
and two, because there was a contract involved, and, I mean, in all fairness to all parties, hiring CDM Smith, they're presumed to be one of the leaders in the country, if not the world, for providing the legal expertise to lay people, political bodies like this, and to protect the interests and represent the interests of the customer, which was the city, the town, and all of the ratepayers. My other question is, typically in these matters, is the statute of limitations running? Where are we on that? Have we missed a window there on the statute
Absolutely
of
not,
limitations?
because that was one of my first concerns when the first water main break happened. Immediately wanted to look at the statute of limitations, statute of repose, and we were able to get CDM Smith, SB, and C&D Construction to all sign to tolling agreements to stop the statute of limitations, which, you know, I think was a very, very important step to preserve all of our rights going forward.
So that's the legal sledgehammer that we are holding over their head, and why they're looking to negotiate a good faith, hopefully, to find a resolution.
Well, I also think that they know their reputation is on the line here. I mean, this is a, you know, a massive problem that they are responsible for. And, you know, I said after the first initial meeting, which was somewhat difficult, they have not been backing away from working with us, trying to help us uncover what the problems are and the extent of the problems.
I mean, and my final question is more of a comment. I have the pleasure of sitting in a number of the Water Commission or the Water Project committee meetings that David attended many of those. And it was a very simple list. You had a group of well-intentioned people sitting around the table, but they were not experts. You had a senior VP from CDM Smith that would give project updates, change orders, and make a recommendation as the professional that this was, of course, the direction to go. And I just think putting the weight on the right shoulders here, I think is critical. And thank God they happen to have the deepest pockets at this time.
Yes, sir?
Can you tell us, Dan Gerlitz, Old Point Road, can you tell us tonight, were these inferior materials used in all connections coming to the island, all the side leads, all the fire hydrants, all the taps to individual houses, and the water shutoffs at each house? Are those inferior materials used in all the connections?
We anticipate, yes.
So all the connections for everybody and everywhere has the potential?
We don't know for certain. I mean, you just hit connections for the fittings for the water main as well as the service connections. So those are two different systems,
Right.
different materials. And I know you know that, but for the general public here. So you know that we have two contracts, contract 1 and contract 2.
Yes.
Okay. Contract 1, we had corrosion issues. Okay. And at the interface of contract 1 and contract 2, we also had corrosion issues. Okay. Elsewhere, we're investigating, you know, the level of, you know, accelerated corrosion on the metal parts. There's parts of the island that don't corrode as quick as along the marsh. So a lot of the metal could be fine for many, many years on many parts of the island. We don't, you know, it depends on the soil conditions, the groundwater conditions. For the service connections for the houses, those are different materials than they use on the water main. Those copper lines, will they hold up in this environment? You know, I'm not to be determined. Okay, I think we all know the answer. I'm not even going to go on record, but that is still being looked at because all those connections to the main are being looked at.
It's PVC, it's not copper.
It's PVC, yeah, but there's still some metallic connections for
That's what I'm questioning.
the corporation stop.
I understand the system.
That's right. The corporation stops.
Right.
You know, there still is some metallic connections. But when you talk about the service connections, I wasn't sure how far into the house you were going with your discussion and what people use for those, because there's a lot of discussion about where this issue ends. So I wasn't
Talking
sure.
about individual house tap, and then you have a water shut off yourself. I live on one of the lowest points on Old Point Road, and I flood 10 times a year. I flood halfway up my driveway, so all of my connections smell the water many times a year. So I'm wondering, are those connections all used with the same inferior materials? So every connection on the the island that have a potential to fail? That's what I'm asking.
The answer to that is they have a potential to fail. Yes.
Can you clarify, though, we have metallic, which cast iron or ductile, but then you have brass bronze fittings, and then there's a distinction in the metals there. Are we experiencing the same type of corrosion on the copper brass alloy connections?
We don't know that yet, Bob. We just don't. You know, what we
So
know
we
is...
have an idea on the steel part of it.
Right, what we know is currently the bolts they use, the strainers for the water main, those were all subferior materials. And that's what we know concretely now, but we're making assumptions based on what we found in those two situations and just doing some observations of some additional test pits and one of the fire hydrants, which is leading us to be concerned. And that's what the next set of investigations will help. What our goal is to uncover the extent of what...
And that's why being thorough, so we don't miss any of these.
Correct.
So we can be reimbursed by this correct.
Right. Yes, sir?
From now, I'm Charlie Green, I live on Plum Island on the boulevard here. Is there a contingency plan in case something happens from now until we have a resolution to any of the...
We'll fix it. This is what we did with...
Basically fix it.
We'll basically fix it, and we now know that we would use a higher grade stadium steel and with bituminous coating on the bolts that if we change out, if there should be another water main break. And the two that we had, even the one that was in 4:30 in the morning in the middle of Hurricane Sandy, they fixed in 3 hours.
Okay.
So, again, they will be able to, the crews will be able to come in and fix the system. As I said earlier, we don't anticipate from everything that we know and the integrity of the system and the fact, think about all the trucks with all the stones that came over carrying all the jetty rocks. We set a certain weight limit purposely because of our concern about the system, and we were successful. We didn't have any issues relating to the stones being brought over out to the jetty for repair.
And one more question.
Sure.
I'm sure everybody here probably has the same question in the back of their mind. If there is a water main, the water main shutoff is right outside my house. I mean, I could look right at the top of it, where they shut the water off. If that gets compromised and takes out half my foundation or half my living room, who's going to cover that? I mean, if that happens. In the meantime, I'm sure a lot of people here have that same question. What if there's property damage in this whole situation?
I mean, those are the type of fears that we all want to relax, because that's an extreme break. There's not, between the pressure and the volume of water, the pipe sizes out here, anything like that.
We're on sand too.
I understand. Yep. There's so many variables. How well the building's constructed, and the pressures in the system, and where you are, and that type of thing. Let's not go there. I mean, we really don't want to go there, because...
I'm not trying to make everybody nervous or anything, but that's a concern I'm sure people have.
But when you look at what the original water main breaks look like, there were basically, bolts that had dissolved almost, and it slipped apart. And so it wasn't, these gushing, geysers of water and, concern where it was all going. It was contained within, the water runoff and where the break was. And these were, cracks and things pulling apart. So it's, a little bit different. So as I said, I don't think we anticipate any type of major catastrophic event like that happening.
Mayor, can I add?
Yeah.
And also, I'm the city engineer. I'm not from the operations side, but to further relieve your anxiety, I'm not the operations side, but our operators have guys on call after hours. During hours, they could be out here within 15 minutes to shut off a valve. So it would take an awful long time to undermine a structure, so.
Larry?
Larry, just clarification. On the major breaks that we've already had, and based on what we know from examining those, with materials used in those connections different from the ones specified in the contract, or were they the same that were specified?
My understanding is they're the same. They were the same that were used for the entire water system.
They didn't substitute something that was not specified in the original
Anything
design.
can happen, as you know, in terms of, we're out of these bolts and I'll just grab these and put them in. You know, things can happen during a construction project, but according to, you know, what we know about the specs, they were the same specification throughout the entire water system.
So they install what they were supposed
Right,
to.
but what we don't know is if we're facing the same conditions with soil and groundwater that we have at the directional drill and where the other second water main was. And that's what the additional borings that will happen will give us that information.
Attention to the camp dresser. As an issue of design, probably, why didn't they anticipate that particular trouble?
That is, you're absolutely right. You know, they knew they were working in a saline environment. You're absolutely right.
I was the Ward 1 council when we went through the failure of the
Reber gaskets,
pumping devices that froze over in wintertime.
right.
Clearly a design flaw that was put into the project at the very beginning. Had to be corrected over a long period of time.
Right, right.
So,
Don, I'd like to just say one thing that everybody should know about. The inside of your house, the pressure tank that's on your water system, okay, is unique to Plum Island.
The expansion
Nowhere
tanks.
else in the city.
You're talking about the expansion
And they're
tanks?
breaking all over this place. And when they break, they flood your basement or flood your house, depending on where they are. And I don't know how many people have experienced it, but my plumbers tell me they've done dozens of them. And if you're not home, it will flood your house, and it will undermine your house. And you pay for that, because, you know, you pay for all the water you use.
So I think your point is well taken, David, and it was
And
one
when
that I was...
when I talk to the city, they don't know anything about it.
Well, why would we? It had nothing to do with the Plum Island water and sewer system.
Well, that is, because it's the water systems designed that put that tank on our houses.
But that was individually installed by private plumbers, and that I would ask that all of you go back and check your expansion tanks and check the
Have your plumber
hardware.
check it.
And check the hardware and make sure that they use good quality, because again, you're living in a saline environment too.
Well, did they have a specification? They had a specification how to hook it up. I'm not saying it's the city's fault, but people should be aware it's happening.
Right. No, I agree.
And you can't see it.
I agree. Yes?
Donna, as a comfort level to everyone on the island, do the sewer and water departments have plenty of spare parts to take us through this winter if there are any problems in every capacity
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
until the problem
No,
is resolved?
we started actually stockpiling materials after the first water main break because we didn't know what we were dealing with. And we
Good.
wanted to be able to, you know, be prepared in that situation, you know, that we would have materials, and in the event that we need something, we have access to be able to get additional materials.
That makes me feel better.
Yeah, yeah. Anyone that, wait, is there anyone else who hasn't had a chance to ask a question yet who wants to? Okay, Paul.
Paul Dobbins, Plum Island, Newbury. Mayor, should there be a catastrophic failure for whatever reason where we would lose our water, would the city consider allowing us to reinstall our wells as a backup?
No, you know, no, and that's not gonna happen. I mean,
Well, you know they're going to condemn our house if we don't have water.
yeah, but if it won't happen for an extensive period of time. It was 3 hours and we fixed the water main break, each of them. Yes, sir.
Let's look at Plum Island. Going forward, what's the time frame? I maybe like to address it to you perhaps, Ken. What are we looking at here in terms of the decision about whether we've got a settlement with the engineering firm or we have to go to court and take it to litigation?
Well, let me just, that's a really good question. So the next step, as I said, is for them to do 50 borings. All right, that has to, it went through the Conservation Commission in Newbury last night. It will go before our Conservation Commission in 2 weeks. We have to get National Grid out to do the dig safe. CDM has marked the areas that they want to take boring samples, 50 of them. We want to go out and make sure, look at the drawings, make sure that they're as far away from the water sewer pipes as possible, because we don't want to have any unanticipated problems with the drilling. They will come out sometime in November. They will take the samples. We will be there to observe. We have to coordinate our team to be there to observe. As they take the samples, then they will go back to a lab for assessment. and that will take probably several weeks to get the results. Then they have to be reviewed by both engineering, legal teams, so that's several months to get to the next spot. And then we have to decide, all right, so let's say that we have portions of the island that are telling us that the samples are exactly the same as what we found at the directional drill and the second water main break. So what is our response at that point? Do we want to target those first? And do they go and open up those? And we begin to make repairs there. Those are the kinds of decisions that have not been made yet. I mean, we're just in, the first round of corrosion results.
And so you don't have the results, but in terms of anticipating what the options are, have you gotten that far? Say, if this is the case, this is the action we're going to take. If that's the case, these are the actions we're going to take. You haven't done it. We don't know.
Because we don't know the extent of what the problems are. If it is in the worst case scenario,
Yeah, if it's, let's say it's the worst case scenario, then what would the decision be at that point?
If, worst case scenario, if we could be comfortable with a settlement, if we made a settlement recommendation that everybody was comfortable with, and if they would not fulfill that settlement, then we'd have to go to litigation.
So I understand that. I'm saying it's the worst case scenario in terms of the conditions that we're finding and the extent of repair or replacement that has to be done. How long do you think it will take to either come to the determination with the engineers that they're going to assume responsibility and do it, or how long are you going to give them to do that? I'd like to know, are we going to be looking at 2-3 years down the line? Are we looking at 8-9 months down the line?
I can't answer that question just because I don't know what their response is going to be. So far, they've been cooperative. That's encouraging. It could have been just everyone hiding behind legal, and that's not been the case. And so I appreciate the fact that at least there is some ownership on their part that they are out here working with us. And I think once we get through this next level of investigation, we would be able to answer those questions better. But I also think the fact that that the Attorney General is involved makes a big difference in the way CDM is responding.
How does that influence how the spec turn out if the Attorney General is involved?
Well, it's a criminal case, and that's all I can say.
So it's a criminal case?
It's a criminal case. We're working on a civil case. So that obviously is of concern to the company, so that helps our situation. Councilor Sullivan?
Thank you. Dick Sullivan, City Councilor at Large, your report. I just have a couple of questions. And I don't want to be an alarmist, okay? But I spent 32 years in the Newport Fire Department, and I have seen the damage that a hydrant slipping off the main can do, and I've seen the damage that a water main break can do to a roadway. Those were the extremes. So like I said, I don't want to be an alarmist, but they can cause a significant amount of damage. I have to leave, but I just would like to ask, as a city councilor, mayor, can you forward a copy? Oh, I also want to point out that Councilor Brian Darren is here as well. Can you provide a copy to the city councilors of that AG's memo that you got in the email, just so that we know what's going on as well?
The statement, yes, absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you. I gotta leave. Thank you folks for coming down here tonight too.
Yes, Kelsey?
Hi, Mayor. I just want to say that this has been enormously informative and really helpful, and I've appreciated it. And I wondered, is there any schedule for getting continued updates over the next, months? I don't know if you are thinking.
No, I think
of
that's absolutely a great question. I think that based on the fact that we now have this information from the AG that came yesterday, that we can talk more freely and openly as much as we can, that wouldn't impact either litigation, that's going on. So once we are ready to have CDM out on the island to come and do the boring test, would you like to meet again to know that when that's happening?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, so as soon as we've worked out all the protocol, and we also need to let you know what they have agreed to do in terms of, because we're not totally convinced of what they've put before us in terms of the fix and removing some of the metal and replacing it with this sort of interlocking PVC with another Reber gasket that's never, we just want more data in terms of where these have been used, how long, this is a new type of pipe. can it be used in this system effectively? So we're looking at all those kinds of factors, and we move slowly with this because we don't want to, as I think Attorney Britt said, we don't want to make missteps in terms of, missing a piece as we go forward. But we will have another meeting as soon as we know when they'll be coming out to do the borings, and when we have accepted the plans for what they're talking about to do the repairs on both of the water mains, we'll let you know. And again, at the same time, my request to them is to look at the hot fire hydrants. And so I'm really going to be pushing that issue too. Yes, Eric?
Hi, Mayor. I reiterate that. This was very helpful, very informative. Appreciate it. Digitally, maybe on the website, can we get like some sort of a blog post, or like when something's approved, it's an update, because not everybody can make it to these meetings?
Sure.
If there could be some kind of a little spot, a little sliver in the city.
Well, it just so happens that finally the new city's website will be launched on Friday, and I will set up a section of that website for Plum Island water sewer issues. And so I can constantly keep putting up information that I can there. There'll also be a weekly update and there'll be a mayor's column there so that I'll cross-reference if there's any information, because that will be on the home page, so that if you see something about Plum Island water and sewer, go and look for the link, and I'll be posting more information there also. Thank you. That was a good idea, Eric. Thank you. I appreciate that. Yes, sir.
Steve, a bit of a follow-up to what Larry McCavan asked earlier about looking at what was designed versus what was built. And by and large, I think I've heard the answer that by and large what was put in the ground met the scope of work that was originally put in place, with a possible exception at least of the double O-ring versus single O-ring. But again, which I think you alluded to, there may be other issues about where what was put in the ground didn't match what the specs were. I think we ought to look at that. But in terms of the design, I think somewhere along the way the phrase usual and customary comes up in a lot of engineering projects where I've done this in the usual and customary way of engineering firms, whatever. And that may need some taking a look at as well, in my opinion. Certainly, I'm thinking of two issues in particular. One, when the excavations were done, there was a lot of excess sand that was left over, because when they backfilled the trenches almost immediately, they filled it up and they had excess sand. Now, two things about that. When I was watching them doing it on my street, I noticed that they weren't tamping down underneath the pipes that were newly laid. And in general, it's a good thing to do when you're doing construction work. You need to recompact things. That wasn't done. And if there is subsequent subsidence, that could certainly compromise the joining, because you might have undermining just due to that. Now, is that usual and customary? I don't know what the specs call for, but in my mind, it should have been done, but it clearly wasn't being done. And another example of what it may be usual and customary is that excess sand. There was a lot of happiness in the thought that we could put it back on the beachfront to help restore the beachfront area. But there was some concern about compatibility of the sand that was excavated with putting it on the beachfront. So like for every 5-yard dump truck or something like that, a 5-gallon bucket was taken to see if that was what the material was. Well, that completely overlooked the fact that the material being dug up included the macadam that was already there. And we ended up having a lot of macadam going on the beachfront, the big removal action to pull that stuff back. And again, what was that usual and customary given the nature of the project that was being undertaken? So there's lots of little angles to look at in this, which is why I think these public meetings are a good idea.
A lot more than little angles to look at. So, but you're right. Your points are very well taken. Thank you. Other questions?
Just a quickie. Is it safe to say that when it was determined what material was to be used, soil samples were taken? And based on the soil samples, they wrote a specification for the materials. And now that there are ruptures or there are breaks, someone is saying the soil is different. It's different on Plum Island Turnpike than it is.
Nobody's saying the soil's different. There was a comprehensive study that was done prior to even the contract award, talking about the conditions out on Plum Island, and for any contractor putting in a water and sewer system having to pay attention to the environment, in terms of not only the saline environment, but the organics in the soil that can contribute to corrosion. And so our claim is that that wasn't taken into consideration. And they just, whoever got the job of speccing out, this job just didn't pay attention to that information. And I think it goes back to, best practices and, standards in engineering and design, and that, this is totally unacceptable what they've done.
Are you permitted to say what the hang-up is now? Where?
What the heck, all these things take time, because you don't just say, CDM comes in and says, okay, I want to go do borings. You don't just say, okay, go ahead. You have to work on protocol. You have to be sure you have supervision of them. I don't trust them. Do you trust them? No. I mean, we've got to have, supervision of every single thing they do. Legal has to approve all the protocols to, again, make sure we're preserving all of our rights. So I'm going to give Senator Clark a chance to speak, since he never comes to a meeting and not says something, so I figured he has something to say. He has been such a friend to the island, so Senator Wilson, you wanted to say something?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think this is the quietest I've ever been at any meeting in my entire life. But I just want to say two things. One, I want to thank you for gathering us together. I think it's critically important that we all have information about what's going on, because it affects the rights and the responsibilities of everyone in the city and on the island. And in order to be good stewards of those responsibilities, we have to actually know what's happening. And I know that that's been difficult early on, because we've been trying to protect the integrity of an investigation, a very serious investigation that could result in very serious penalties and consequences for the folks that have behaved improperly here. And I want to be very specific about that, because for me, there have been questions tonight about who was providing the oversight on the part of the community. And I know that there was a working group. I remember it very distinctly. But that working group, from my recollection, was not comprised of experts. Experts were retained for the purpose of representing the interests of the people on Plum Island and the city of Newburyport, and that expertise was not supplied in the professional way that was contracted for. And that's the essence of the issue. So those folks have to be held accountable. And I think, as we all understand, the folks that are probably the principal actors in this case, who we depended on because of their expertise, happen to have deep pockets. Now, reaching those deep pockets is going to be an issue. And in order to predict, and there will be questions about how long that will take, it could be a significant period of time. But what's important is that we all maintain our commitment to recovering and making recompense for the injustice that's been done here. That's one set of issues. There is another set of issues. And that set of issues is maintaining the integrity as best we can of the systems that serve us on the island. That's a public health issue, it's a public safety issue, and it's equally as important. And I wouldn't want anyone to leave the room thinking that those issues won't be addressed until the legal issues are addressed. The mayor's made a commitment, and I think it's an important commitment to restate, that the problems with the system will be addressed as they are discovered or as a problem occurs. No one, and correct me if I'm wrong, Madam Mayor, but no one is going to wait to fix a problem to see if we're going to get recovery for it. The problems will be addressed. Now, the one issue that we have to be mindful of is to make sure that we have the resources to fix those problems as they occur. And my assumption is that budgeting is being done for that, and the resources are available, so that those problems can be addressed, and then we can pursue each and every claim in the proper venue. And that brings me to my last point. It's very important from my perspective that we pursue every claim. And what I mean by that is that the process of discovery and investigation here is critically important, because the last thing that we want to do is reach a settlement and then have a subsequent issue arise that isn't compensable because we agreed to a settlement that foreclosed our rights. And that's why it's important that we have very, very expert legal counsel on this case to look at that. And so there may be some frustration out there, because you'll say, well, why don't we just get on with it? Well, the difficulty with that is oftentimes in these cases, it's been my experience that the culpable party will try to lob at you what it looks like a very big number, thinking that you'll accept that just to foreclose the matter and bring it to a conclusion. The difficulty with that is we still don't know what lies on the other side of all these problems and what it's going to take to address them. So I, for one, believe that we should take as much time as necessary to identify all of the problems and the possible consequences of those problems, not just now, but in the foreseeable future, for two reasons. One, that's the only way really to get justice in this situation. is not to put a Band-Aid on this problem and let the parties that are responsible off the hook. But number two, to make sure that we have the resources necessary to fix the problem and ensure that we have reliable systems, again, for the foreseeable future. So the last meeting that we had, I know the mayor was able to talk a little bit about what was going on with the AG, certainly with the IG, a little bit with the DA. I think what we'll see now is that the AG is going to carry on with her investigation. And the legal necessities of that investigation preclude a lot of public comment. Now, this could be a situation which results in some very serious criminal charges. And the last thing we want to do is have some of the internal information from that investigation become public in a way that may compromise it. On the other side, the legal claims here on the part of the city, on behalf of the ratepayers, on behalf of the city, the citizens of Plum Island, in my opinion, are somewhat of a different nature because there are discussions going on. And so I think the pace needs to and will increase about the dissemination of information. I think we're all going to need to have some patience as that process plays out and have faith that, for instance, we may need more than 50 borings. We may need another 50 borings. I, for one, say drill as many as it takes to understand the totality of what's wrong here, so that we don't have to come and say, we discovered another problem 2 years from now. That is not going to give you confidence in us, and it's not going to give us confidence in what we're doing. So I think we should do what it takes. I hope that we will have, I think putting the information up on the website is important. I'm hoping that maybe we can link that to Newbury's website as well, so that folks can look on either municipal website and get that information. And that we will agree that as soon as there is enough of a body of information, and it seems to me that the right time is maybe when the boring information is available, that we gather together and say, here's where we're at, here's where we are in the process. But I can assure you that the legislative delegation, all of us, are committed to doing what it takes to benefit and assist this effort. Right now, the only role that we've had really has been bringing the state resources to bear, working to encourage the AG to be involved, the IG, the district attorney, but we are also prepared to do what it takes to support this effort. Right now, the mayor is the quarterback of that effort. She's well served by good legal counsel, but please know that we are available as well to help whenever we need to. So let me just thank you for coming out tonight and for your interest and your patience and you're asking good questions and digesting and understanding the answers. We're on this together, and I think we can get to a good result. It's unfortunate that we have to be in this place, but the best thing we can do now is focus on the goals ahead. Full legal recovery, repairing the system to the state of good repair that we all expected to have. So that's what I was thinking.
Thank you all for coming.